Mr. President, trustees, faculty, parents, graduates, and friends, it is a great honor to address this audience on this very special day. Congratulations. In his great novel on the French Revolution, Charles Dickens, the opening words of that novel, the novel is A Tale of Two Cities. The opening words of that book are, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair." This also describes our age, an age of very much and growing darkness, but also an age of much greater hope. I fear for you because it is a season of darkness, but I envy you, for it is a season of light. As Roberta just mentioned in terms of heaven is not my home, or as our Bible reading from Revelation says, we have a new heaven and a new earth. It describes the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven into the midst of the earth. This is where God intends us to be and where we will be in the future. This earth, our home. On the same lines, let us remember that when Jesus rose from the dead, after he rose from the dead, he ate lunch. He was not a disembodied creature. When doubting Thomas said, unless I see for myself, I won't believe he's risen. And Jesus says, "See, I've got holes in my hands, flesh and blood." Jesus also said to the disciples, "It is I myself. Touch and see. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And the creeds of the Christian church universally affirm, "I believe in the resurrection of the body." What I'd like to do this evening is take these two interwoven central themes of hope, of a new heaven and a new earth, and a resurrection in which the good that we achieve in this life will also continue. There's so much that could be said of this. I just want to concentrate on three areas. One we've touched on is some understanding of the church worldwide. A second is some of the growing problems which arise in the United States. And a third, closer to home in our more personal lives, our understanding of how we work and we rest, all in the hope of the resurrection. Our church. The Christian church is worldwide and always has been. The church was in Africa before it was in Europe. The church was in India before it was in England. The church was in China before it was in the United States. The Chinese church is almost 1,000 years old, older than the American church. Disciples from Iran brought the gospel there. Now, of the world's 2.2 billion nominal Christians, 3/4 live outside the West. 80% of the active Christians live outside the West. China will soon be the country with the most number of Christians. Africa, the continent with the most number of Christians. If there were an average Christian in our world, it would be a Nigerian woman or a young Chinese man. And Christians are also the single most widely persecuted religious group in the world today. We should not say them, but we face genocide in Iraq and Syria and Somalia. Thousands die in Nigeria, and much persecution elsewhere. But in this story of pain, there are so many other things happening in the church. Let me just tell one story. One you will be aware of. You may remember it was covered on national news. Last year, ISIS, the Islamic State, beheaded 22 people on a beach in Libya and filmed it. You can see it on the internet. These people were Egyptian Christians working in Libya who had captured. And in the ISIS video, they asked each of these Christians, bowed down with their hands tied behind their back, that if they would give up their faith, they would live. And if they did not, they would be beheaded. Each one of them declined to renounce their faith. So they were all killed on camera. This is last year. There's something of a mystery about the 22nd person who does not appear to have been an Egyptian Christian. Maybe from Ghana, lots of African workers in Libya. And we don't know, or at least I do not, whether he was previously a Christian or there was something he decided on the spur of the moment. But when ISIS came to him and asked him, would he be a Muslim, he pointed to the Egyptian Christians and their bodies, and he said, their God is my God. Perhaps he was his God before, or perhaps that witness which he saw, he says, for these people, if this is their God, I want that God. There are thousands of such stories in our modern world. Let us remember them. Do not give in to despair, but see the hope which is there. And also never forget that now we live in the largest period of church growth in human history. I mentioned China again. The church in China over the last 35 years has gone from perhaps 2 million to a pretty hard number, over 70 million. Nothing like that has happened in any other country at any time in history. I'm including the book of Acts. It's nothing like that. So we live in this amazing time of church growth. And also this church does works, feeding the hungry, tending to the sick, preaching the gospel. But let me just take a couple of examples because I work in a political arena. And there are courageous Christians throughout the world who work in this, of whom we're often not aware. Let me just take 3 examples from Asia. In Hong Kong, perhaps the leading activist for democracy in Hong Kong since it returned to China was a barrister, Martin Lee, a very committed Christian. He didn't make a fuss about it, not because he was ashamed, but he wanted to represent all of the people in Hong Kong. Or another, Benigno Aquino, very committed Catholic. Life was threatened under the dictator Marcos in the Philippines, and he got a job at Harvard. He was safe there, but decided that God was calling him to return, although he was told he would be killed, and that he expected. He died at the airport. He never made it to the terminal after he got off the plane. And he probably knew that would happen. Again, another courageous democracy activist. Or take Kim Dae-jung, the first democratically elected leader of South Korea. He also won the Nobel Peace Prize. In his Nobel Peace Prize lecture in the year 2000, he said, I have lived and I continue to live in the belief that God is always with me. I know this from experience. In August of '73, I was exiled in Japan, but kidnapped by intelligence agencies of the then military government of South Korea. The agents took me to their boat at the seashore. They tied me up, they blinded me, and stuffed my mouth. Just when they were about to throw me overboard, Jesus Christ appeared to me with such clarity. I clung to him and I begged him to save me. At that very moment, an airplane came down from the sky to rescue me from the moment of death. This is the year 2000 Nobel Peace Prize lecture. There are other such heroes. We should know more. Perhaps just one more. I have only ever heard one sitting governor of a state quote John Calvin and quote Abraham Kuyper as to how his understanding of them has shaped what he does as a governor. This man is not an American. His nickname is Ahok. He's the governor of Jakarta. That is, he's a very committed Christian, outspoken Christian, who's the governor of the capital of the world's largest Muslim country. And he'll probably get re-elected. Or just looking at the strange things which happen in the world. The last commencement address I gave was in Indonesia to the Islamic State University in Bandung. They requested a lecture on religious freedom. So our world and our church is full of pain, but is also brimming with wonder and with hope. If we turn to the United States on the political front, we again see worrying trends. As many of you know, 2013, the Supreme Court of the state of New Mexico ruled that a Christian photographer could be compelled to photograph a lesbian marriage. Similar actions are now taken against owners of cake and flower shops. Gordon College's accreditation was threatened because of its moral stand. As many of you know, in Sacramento, a bill, SB 1146, went through the Senate yesterday. If finally accepted, this bill would mean that Biola and similar institutions must give up all state funding or else give up the right to maintain the school's religious conviction and institutional identity in hiring, in admissions, and so forth. This is a matter I know is very much on the hearts and minds of the leaders of Biola and elsewhere. These challenges will probably increase. There's a very famous quotation from the year 2011 from Cardinal Francis George, then Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago. And he, not a man given to outspoken statements, very careful man, said, "I expect to die in my bed. My successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr in the public square." But the Cardinal also laments that many people don't continue the quotation from the end with his final phrase. And his successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly help rebuild civilization, as the church has done so often in human history. I don't know whether these things will happen, but you might end up in prison, and you will also work to rebuild civilization in the light of God's word. I've talked about some world trends, some worrying trends in the United States. Let me turn to something a little more domestic. A good part of your life is now thinking about work. You may have found work, jobs, you may be looking. But try never to lose sight that your work is a calling from God. All work. William Tyndale, the father of the English Bible, was executed for heresy. One of the charges against him was that he said, which he did say, between the preaching of the word and the washing of dishes, there is a difference. Concerning pleasing God, there's no difference at all. To be an apostle or a shoemaker, all is one. Let me quote from my former colleague, Calvin Seerveld, about his father. "My father is a seller of fish. He is in full-time service for the Lord. When I watch my dad's hands, big, beefy hands with broad, stubby fingers, each twice the thickness of mine, they could never play a piano. When I watch those hands delicately split the back of a mackerel, or with a swift true stoke, fillet a flounder close to the bone, leaving all the meat together. When I know that those hands dressed and peddled fish from the handlebars of a bicycle in the grim 1930s, cut and sold fish year after year with never a vacation, through fire and sickness, thieves, disaster, weariness, winter cold, and hot, muggy summers. In weakness often, but always in faith, consecratedly cutting up fish before the face of the Lord. When I see that, I know that God's grace can come down to a man's hand and the flash of a scabby fish knife. If you serve faithfully as teachers or as businessmen or cutting fish, God's grace will also come down to your hands and your mind. And let me add that too often when we think of work and calling, we think of our jobs, which is important that we do. But much work is at home. In 1522, Martin Luther had a sermon on marriage. And he wanted to emphasize things to men and women, but he decided in 1522 to emphasize the importance to men of doing housework. This is what Luther says. Natural reason, the unchristian mind, takes a look at married life. She turns up her nose and says, "Alas, must I rock the baby, wash its diapers, make its bed, smell its stench, stay up nights with it, take care of it when it cries, heal its rashes and sores, take care of this, take care of that, do this, do that, endure this, endure that. What? Should I make a prisoner of myself?" And Luther says, what does the Christian faith say to this? It opens its eyes, looks upon these insignificant, distasteful, and despised duties in the Spirit, and says, "Lord, I confess to thee that I am not worthy to rock the little babe or wash its diapers, or to be entrusted with the care of the child, but how gladly will I do so. Neither frost, nor heat, nor drudgery, nor labor will distress or dissuade me, for I am certain it is pleasing in your sight." Luther goes on. When a father goes ahead and washes diapers or performs some other mean task for his child, God, with all of his angels, is smiling. Not because a man is washing diapers, but because he is doing so in Christian faith. All of these things are our duties in the Spirit. They are works of Christian faith. They bring joy to God and the angels. So follow your calling with computers or whatever else God puts in your hand, but also with the children and the dishes. I've covered a range of things and probably putting on maybe too many burdens on this celebratory night. So let me raise one other pleasurable duty we have. One other side of our life on our calling before God is the calling to rest. I don't know you well, but I know many of us, especially Christians, especially Calvinists, have great problems with rest. One time, true story, I received a phone call from Christianity Today. I was doing some teaching in Vancouver, so they hadn't been able to get hold of me, and in the end, they did. They wanted me to write an editorial for them. It was to be centered on a recent book called The Overworked American. I was asked to focus on how and why we seem to be ever more overworked and how difficult we find it to rest. They got hold of me late on a Friday evening. I asked them when the article was due. They said, Monday morning. What hypocrites. And you know what I said? I said, okay, what a greater hypocrite. Biblically, rest is far more than recuperation from work, though we certainly need recuperation. But it's a condition of the soul. Resting is intimately tied to faith. In the Bible, salvation is often pictured as rest. Rest means letting the world pass us by for a time. Genuine rest requires that we believe that God and our fellows can actually get by without us for a while. It is a moment of celebration when we realize that blessing comes only from the hand of God. That's why rest requires faith. When we rest, we accept God's grace. We do not seek to earn, we receive. We do not justify, we are justified. Let me now close. Pope John Paul II, in early life, lived under Nazi occupation in Poland. He was forced to quit university to see his professors and priests sent to concentration camps. He was condemned to labor in a limestone quarry. Freed from Nazi occupation, his country then entered decades of communist repression. He lived a life against the odds. He was also shot, and he suffered excruciating illnesses. When I saw him, he was bent double with sickness and could not look up to see people's faces. And this amazing man accomplished so many things, including ending the power of communism in Eastern Europe. And he said many times, I plead with you, never, ever give up on hope. Never doubt, never tire, never be discouraged. This was not a naive optimism of, cheer up, but concretely a hope grounded in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Do not be afraid. Let me now quote something from John Updike about the resurrection and the resurrection of the body on which we've touched. Some selections from his poem, 7 Stanzas at Easter, of Jesus. Make no mistake, if he rose at all, it was as his body. If the cell's dissolution did not reverse, the molecules reknit, the amino acids rekindle, then the church will fall. It was not as the flowers, each soft spring recurrent. It was not as his spirit in the mouths and fuddled eyes of the apostles. It was as his flesh, ours. The same hinged thumbs and toes, the same valved heart that was pierced, died, withered, paused, and then regathered out of enduring might with new strength to enclose. Let us not mock God with metaphor, analogy, sidestepping, transcendence, trying to make of the event a sort of parable, a sign painted in the fading credulity of an earlier age. Let us walk through the door. Distinguished graduates, you will work and you will deal with the problems of the world. And you will go through that door. But now you should play and rest. May God bless you in all you do.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.